Hey, everybody. Welcome to SF Indie Fest. Appreciate having you here. We've been bringing interesting, independent, and eclectically awesome films from around the world to the Bay Area for the last 2 decades or so. As you've probably heard from me before, is like we never anticipated kind of screening films in this virtual world. But the thing that's neat is it kind of democratizes the participation of filmmakers from all around the world to kind of join us in Q&As. And we're lucky enough to have director Nate Clark and Lana Garland, producer of The Passing On. So if we can welcome. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Hi, Chris.
Thanks again for being here. It was really exciting to discover your film, as a programmer, you look at what other folks at other film festivals are programming. And, The Passing On just kind of caught my eye right from the beginning. And so it was exciting to kind of get a chance to watch. And then, of course, now to get a chance to screen your film as part of SF Indie Fest. I'm sure many of our audience are curious. Can you guys both give us a little bit of background of how you kind of discovered this story and how you knew that there was kind of a film there to be made?
We were originally telling sort of more of a survey film about people that work in and around death, and one of the segments of that was going to be James, the main character in the film, and we were just going to spend sort of 4 or 5 days with James, and it just became really clear very early on. And we found James because we were doing work in San Antonio and did a basic Google search and find the story about the National Embalmer of the Year, and so that piques your curiosity. So we spent a number of days with James, and near the end of that time, there was the scene that is in the film where James is sort of testing the two students, Anna Marie and Clarence, about sort of how they would end a funeral. And I just remember being really struck at that moment about sort of all the layers of what was going on, about all the insight into how you talk on the phone in a funeral home and what that says about what it's like to work with people that are grieving, but then also sort of how James was mentoring these young students. And I was at a point in my career where you start to make that pivot where you're thinking not just about how do you invest in your projects, but how do you invest in other people. And so that really piqued my curiosity and sort of began a process of exploring more of what the story with James might be, and sort of a much longer term relationship.
And for me, I was working at the Southern Documentary Fund where you and I, Chris, first met. And they, like as Nate said, they brought a project to us. And the name of the project was We All Die. I tease him about that relentlessly. And, like you said, it was a survey film. And then one day he called us and he said, you know what? I think I found another story. I want to put a pin in this story about death and dying and focus on this one funeral home. And I remember he came to Durham and we sat down and we watched it. And I was, just taken aback, first and foremost, because I had no idea that this profession, which was so ubiquitous with African American life and culture, was on its way out. I had no idea about that. But then I saw it and, I just started to percolate about, oh my God, we got to tell this story because we're about to lose this thing. And so I was at SDF a couple more months. I left, and then Nate reached out and said, will you come and produce this? And I said, oh, cool. I just thought it was a great opportunity, and I knew that, intrinsically, that Nate and I would work together well as a team.
That's cool. As you kind of began to dig in, what did James think about becoming kind of a star of the film? In the sense of like, maybe I'm reading it too much, but like, when you're in that business, right? You're putting on a show for other people. I mean, there's a lot of work behind the scenes, but to then become kind of front and center and have, camera spend so much time. I mean, was there any hesitancy there, or because of this passing on of tradition or the changes that are made, that did he feel like there was more at stake, I guess, of why he had to kind of step into the spotlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're hitting on like an important element of the funeral industry, which there is this performative aspect to it. There's a scene in the film, right near the end of the film, after sort of Clarence has announced his intentions, and two of the guys that work in the funeral home sort of walk down the center of the aisle, and the camera sort of pans with them, and then they move the casket off. And it was this sort of like shot that took, like, you would think would take a lot of like timing and like logistics, and like, I need you to do here and be there. And we did it twice, and both times they did it perfectly, right? Because it's sort of that sense of like walking and timing and coordinating all your actions, all those kind of things for the funeral itself. It's part of their day-to-day life. And so there was, and I think that raises some concerns, right? Like, not many people get into documentary filmmaking because they want to capture performances. At least when it comes to sort of real life, you want to capture people. And so, but it's funny, that being said, spending any amount of time with James, he just is this incredibly sincere, authentic, straightforward, I've lived life, I have nothing to hide, here is who I am. And so it wasn't, for him, it wasn't really difficult to sort of enter into that and feel like we were getting into sort of some of the deeper layers pretty quickly. I think the bigger challenge was with Clarence. And I still, wonder to this day, sort of, we told Clarence's story in so many different ways, and he would always look different based on it. And he has this remarkable ability to sort of code shift between various different environments. And it raised the question, who's the real Clarence? And I think that's a question that is probably left open by the film.
And for me, the lens that I have and see these people through was a little different because, we share an ethnic background. But James reminds me of that classic kind of, and it's classic for me because he reminds me of my father's generation, where you had to, if you didn't have a pot to piss in, you had to show up in a certain kind of way. So Nate talked a little bit about how, it's funny, Nate, we never really talked about this, but there's this performative aspect of doing a funeral, of course. But at the same time, there's this old school Black man swag that James has. He's going to show up, he's going to be clean, he's going to pop, even when he's laid back, he's going to pop that collar a little bit. So it reminds me of that generation of Black men who came of age during the Vietnam War, and had to fight for respectability, really. And Clarence reminds me, there's nothing about Clarence that surprises me, because he is that typical millennial. And you got to also understand that, as like Clarence, I'm first generation college educated in my family. And so when you're like that, I think you're creating out of nothing. And so the only thing you're trying to do is look good. You just don't want to look stupid. And so that reminds me of Clarence. And on top of that, he is a member of a marginalized community. He is a gay man who in a Black Christian environment. So add all of that together, and of course he has to shapeshift. Survival for him means shapeshifting. But I recognize it because I know so many people like that. And when I showed it to other people who are Black women my age, they were like, especially black women who happen to be gay, they're like, oh, bring that boy to me. They knew exactly what to tell him. They feel like they want to mother him. And, you know, Clarence is treading territory that nobody around him is treading. And he so needs that mentorship and doesn't know it.
How do you see, what do you see happening? I mean, if you were going to foreshadow with, the different steps in kind of Clarence's career, I mean, like, where do you think he's probably going to kind of find his way, or where he wants to kind of work, or the kind of community he wants to serve? I mean, does he want to kind of continue to serve these kind of more traditional communities, or where do you think he might go to next?
Well, I think we know. Nate, you want to share?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's been a journey for him, right? I think he has been through 4 or 5 different stages since we stopped filming.
Oh,
He
wow.
went and worked in Austin at a couple different white firms, what you would say is sort of a traditionally historic white firm, and then ended up deciding that he wanted to go back to school, study theology, and then but he was started working at another funeral home sort of part-time. I mean, because he's got this remarkable skill set. um and I just say, watching Clarence with a family, he is good at that. He is really, there's something there. And you can see that he's a pretty remarkable communicator too when he preaches. um and so, yeah, he went to school, and now he has started his own funeral home. And I think the big question for me in Clarence is just sort of like, does he have that those tools in his toolbox about like hard work, making good business decisions, becoming a good leader, those kind of things? I think that's one of the big questions for him as he moves forward. And sort of the importance of having mentorship, right? That I
Mm.
think he probably needs people in his life that will walk him through that journey.
Mm.
But I don't know if the starting his own funeral home will like totally crash and burn. There's probably another film to be told right there. But yeah.
Well, talking about kind of like code shifting and things like that, one of the things that's much discussed in the documentary world is like, who gets to tell whose story, and obviously the history of kind of people outside of communities going in and telling it. I mean, I myself am always an advocate of that. That if people are empathetic, and you're able to give voice to the people whose story you're telling, I'm not sure that it matters as much, but I know that others feel differently. And so, how did you guys, as you got access to it, did questions about race ever come up, specifically early on, with James? And then how do you think, as being a black woman and a white man, how do you think those different perspectives kind of shaped the way that you both edited the film, but also filmed it, I guess, as well?
We had to have some really serious conversations. They're not always comfortable, but they're necessary because in my world, excuse me, not only as a filmmaker, but also an arts administrator,
Hmm.
we're scrutinizing who's telling the story. And so, you know, it's everything. While I was at SDF, we changed the policy and decided that if you were not a part of the community that you were doing a film on, we couldn't accept you on as a project. And so when Nate did the pivot, he was concerned about that, and that's another reason why he brought the film to SDF to say, "Listen, this is what I want to do." But he did the right thing and he found an African American producer to bring on. And also, people have this idea, and I'm understanding this. Even, I'm kind of an administrator, like I said, so I have a certain view of this one particular thing. there's a conversation in the world about whose vision a particular story is. Is it solely at the behest of the director, or is there a combination? I've been working as a producer for a very, very long time. And in the work that I've done from HBO to BET to independent, I consider there's such a thing called a creative producer. And that's the work that I do. I am a creative producer. So I am impacting the storytelling. I'm impacting kind of the decisions that are that are made. And the type of dude that Nate is, he's not going to put anything up there. I'm like, you know what? That is just not cool, or that is not authentic, or that doesn't tell the story of the. He would never do that. And so early on, like I said, there was a one particular conversation that we had, and Nate talks about this a lot, and he said that it was a shift between kind of thinking that you had to approach a film from the standpoint of, or this film from the standpoint of, I want something that everybody likes. I want everyone to be able to see this as a film that is worthy, without it necessarily focusing on race. And so I then said to him, well, the only way it's going to be good is if you go deep into the community. And at the heart of it, if it's a film about African Americans, race has got to be a part of the conversation because it is ubiquitous in our lives. And so there was this tweak. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, Nate. Tell me if I'm not. But there was this shift in how we were going to approach the lens and how we were going to talk about the film, whereby we could take a deep dive into the African American experience. And if you go deep enough, you find the humanity. And that's the thing about, this whole conversation about who gets to tell the story. It's not just because you think it's cool and PC that a person from a marginalized community is going to be able to have a credit. It's not that. It's not going to be good if you can't take that deep dive into the community far enough so that there's a humanity that everybody can relate to.
Yeah, that conversation, the two things that really stick out to me that Lana said that were so helpful. One has become a little bit of a mantra, which is that art requires specificity, and or at least this type of storytelling requires specificity. And going back to my comment about what initially sort of drew me to James, which again was just the initial draw, sort of like the handshake was the mentorship. That if this film became solely about mentorship, and as we were talking, sort of like became this sort of universal idea about, and we sort of stripped away all of the race specific reality of this relationship. I think, Lana, you referred to it as like that is a type of colonial filmmaking, right? It's extractive. It's sort of it's going into a community, taking a resource, a person's story, and stripping it away from sort of its context and using it for your own. And I think when we had that conversation, it crystallized and clarified, I think, our relationship, and it clarified, where we needed to go. And I think, I remember, getting really into film and learning all about auteur theory and all that kind of stuff. And I just think when it comes to documentary stuff, all of that is just BS. It's just BS. And like this film is a reflection of three, and I want to include Tim in there as well, but it's really a reflection of three people. It's a reflection of, in terms of on the filmmaking side of things, of myself, Lana, and Tyler Trumbo. And then Tim was one of our main shooter. And I think when you see the film, you see that relationship playing out. And anytime there is something that's sort of intriguing about a direction, like that relationship is at the core of what was making those decisions and forming the film.
Well, thanks for sharing that, guys. Because I mean, it's an overused word sometimes, but like, I just appreciated like the nuance, I guess, in the film, and it did feel like it was immersive, I mean, as much as, an hour and something long, film, is. Do you like, what was the process of like, knowing what to capture? I mean, did James sometimes give you a call and say, hey, look, I have this going on, come and film it? Or did you just decide to drop in every once in a while? What was that like, so that you could kind of capture those details? And
well, we were doing, like I said, we were doing a lot of work in San Antonio, and so that kind of like defined us being there. Yeah, there were, we would have regular conversation. We knew that James was going to be at Myrtle Beach. We knew things were not looking good with Eddie, and then obviously we got a call for when he passed away and when that funeral was coming. So there was some of that, but for the most part, I think it was being present, being curious, and I will say that like that early on, we focused much more on James, and it wasn't till about halfway through the filming that we really began to understand that this was a story between James and Clarence. And so we filmed a lot more about that relationship. So yeah, I think it was, like Lana said, there is this, and I'm sure you know this as well, Chris, is there's this moment where you kind of think like, oh, I've got enough. We've been here enough. And then for some reason, this voice in your head, or you're a producer or a camera operator, says, I think we need one more day. And then you stay for like one more day, and all of a sudden it sort of unlocks something. And you begin to see the film in a way that you didn't see it before. And I'm a big believer too, and you make the film you're given, not the film you want. And so we just try to be open as well in that process of what is sort of the universe giving us in this story, and to not make that decision in production.
So it actually raises a question, before I forget. So Nate, with the initial kind of survey film that you were thinking of making, and maybe 6 Feet Under, is like, was the first survey film more quirky oriented, I guess, or like as an outsider, were you just thinking like, this is this quirky industry? Like, how do you think the tone changed, I guess?
No, I don't think it was quirky as much as it was curious. And I will say it probably would have been a more successful film if it was quirky. It's not like the way that I'm wired as a filmmaker. And yeah, I think it was just, I don't think we had gotten that far into it. I think what we were at that point was a conviction that when we look at death and dying, we see the realities of how we look at life and living. And so there's something worth exploring about death and dying. It helps us understand what it means to be human, and how some of our changing ideas about humanity are reflected in our changing ideas about death and how we treat dead bodies and things. And then I also am just sort of curious about how people work amongst that every day, and what that does to sort of your life. And yeah.
How do you think it affected both? I mean, I don't know how, like, were you comfortable being around, the dead, or how did that shape things? Or
I will say this, I have 2 quick thoughts about that. One is, I've not flown for a year, but at the Richmond airport, I live in Richmond, Virginia, at the top of the jet bridge, as you come off, there is a smell, and it must be a cleaner, but it must be the same cleaner that they use in the prep room. And every time I smell it, and I will say that it causes me this combination of like affection and dread. It was not easy being there, and I don't know how those men and women do it on a regular basis. I think the camera operates as a really helpful filter.
Mm.
But in terms of how it's changed me, one of the things that it's really helped me appreciate, and I've thought a lot about this last year, is the importance of ceremony and ritual
Mm.
in how we mourn.
Mm.
And I think about all the people. I mean, my mother, or my mother, my wife's father died in February,
Mm.
and we've not been able to have a funeral for him since he passed away. And um, that does something to you, right? And uh, and and it's not just funerals that we are losing right now, right? We're losing graduation ceremonies. We're losing in-person Q&As at film festivals, right?
Exactly.
Those are all ceremonial things that are so important. And
Mm.
it really has helped me appreciate, as somebody that would be like, I'm not going to bother going to that wedding. I cannot wait to go to the next wedding.
Wow, that was deep, Nate. And so Nate is our resident philosopher. So making a quirky film about death is not, that's not in his portfolio. Definitely is our resident philosopher.
Well, while I think that kind of brings things full circle, I'd be remiss without asking these last one or two questions, and that's one is, has James and Clarence seen the film, and what did they think about it?
They both loved it. They're just, and it's such a shame that we're in pandemic times because they were so ready. They were so ready to show up to the screening. Um, we were nervous when we first showed them the film, particularly for the pieces about Clarence being gay. We didn't know if it would be problematic, seeing yourself on screen saying that you have an issue with queerness. We didn't know if Clarence broadcasting to the world that he is a gay pastor, that he'd feel a certain kind of way. But it turned out that they both were very, very happy and very, very pleased and felt as though it was pretty authentic.
Nice. And you know, thanks again for making a wonderful film and letting us share it with the kind of community in San Francisco. The thing I always try to remember our audiences is that we're at the luxury that independent filmmakers let us screen their films, and that you as an audience get a chance to see these films very early on in their life. And so it's up to us, the audience, to be your cheerleaders. And so can you tell us a little bit about, like, where do you kind of see the film going, and how can we kind of help spread the word or follow your efforts?
Well, one thing that I'd like to reach out and make an ask, if anybody seeing this is a member of an HBCU, either alum or current student, just to kind of forward to us information about who the programmer is at their schools, or if it's a church in your community that you think might benefit from a screening such as this. Another thing that we wanted to do was to honor those legendary morticians and funeral directors. So if you know of one, please send that person our way. We had the delight during the work in progress screening at Hayti of getting the mayor to give a proclamation to a legendary funeral director. And thank God we did that. We did that at the 2020 festival. And thank God we did that because Skeepy Scarborough, Clarence Skeepy Scarborough, passed away just this past November. And so we were able to honor him and his efforts in the community. He had wonderful stories about how the National Funeral Director and Mortician Association marched across the Pettus Bridge during Bloody Sunday. And so we're very, very happy that we got a chance to honor him before he passed.
Very cool. And what, so passingon.com for the website
Passing on
and
movie.
social media?
Passingonmovie.com.
Awesome. So everybody, just remember, spread the word. Let them know you saw this wonderful film and get people to check it out. And if we can thank Nate and Lana for being here. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Chris.
Yeah, most definitely.